When Mark Meadows became President Trump's chief of staff on March the 6th, 2020, unemployment in America was at an all-time low. And gas prices, by the way, were pretty low, too. And the stock market was at an all-time high. Then COVID hit, and the economy, as well as the rest of the country, came to a screeching halt. In his new book, Chief of Chiefs, that came out just last month, Mark Meadows gives a candid account of his 10 months in the White House. And he joins me now to talk about this on the eve of the January 6th riot at the Capitol that the left is trying to use to define the presidency of Donald Trump and to scare Americans into embracing their radical agenda. Mark, welcome back to Washington Watch.
It is great to be back with you, Tony, in this new format. And obviously, as we look at January 6th coming up, you're right. It's being used, sadly, in a way that is designed to scare the American people, not make the Capitol more secure. And when we look at that, it is really all about trying to make sure that January 6th defined what President Trump and his entire 4 years was all about, when you and I both know that that's not the case. I don't know that there was a stronger pro-life president that we've ever had in the White House than Donald Trump. You talked about energy prices. We went from energy dominance to energy beggars in 11 short months under Joe Biden, sadly. And so all of this comes on the heels of really just a radical takeover of Washington, D.C. So I'm hopeful that in the weeks and months to come, the American people's voice will start to be heard again, and that the midterms and the elections coming up, I know that you and I are not necessarily on the political side of the equation, but the voices of the American people certainly will make a difference if they're willing to speak up.
Well, you and I walked through a lot of the Trump administration together. We had many conversations, many late-night conversations. I think in large part, there were really two major factors, I think, in the success of the Trump administration. One was the people he put in place to carry out an agenda that he embraced. I mean, it was coming from the top. He embraced a conservative agenda, but he put people in place who shared that with passion, yourself included.
Well, we did share it, and it was a vision that honestly, it was all about trying to make sure it got done. But we had a president in Donald Trump that was willing to actually take on great political risk to do things that obviously have never been done. I talk about it in the Chief's Chief. You know, we don't have to look any further than an embassy in Jerusalem, than the number of initiatives that put forth to put American families and religious freedom as the hallmark of what his administration was all about. But putting those people in and around and making sure that their voices were heard against the swamp was a battle that was a daily occurrence. That's why you and I had so many late night calls. You would let me know that of some obstacles that were in the way of getting his priorities accomplished. And sometimes that came from within his own administration. And so it was a critical role that you and others played on making sure that the West Wing was not isolated.
Yeah, let's talk about that for just a moment, Mark, because a lot of people think, well, you know, he's the president. He could just get it done. But there were pockets of resistance within his own administration, as you pointed to, that made it difficult and was quite frustrating, I know, for you and for the president.
Well, there were pockets, and what would happen is occasionally you get a phone call from, like you and I had our cell phone numbers. And so you might call me and let me know that something is happening over at HHS or at DHS or the State Department. And it was not necessarily, in fact, oftentimes it was not at the direction of President Trump. It was at the direction of some bureaucrat that said, we understand what he wants, but we're going to be here after he's gone, and we're going to do it our way. And so it was really having to step into that. I've got one story in the book, Tony, where I talk about the fact that, I'm watching Tucker Carlson, and I'm finding out that we're actually paying for gain of function research in a Wuhan lab early on, and had to get on the phone with the secretary of HHS. But I'm learning about it in real time as the president's learning about it. Actually, he learned about it in the greatest invention known to man, according to him, is TiVo, about an hour and a half later, and called me about it. But it was those kinds of things, those battles that happened each and every day, that the president was not willing to shy away from.
What agency did you have, or did the president have the most difficulty with?
It's at times it was probably more the HHS in terms of the tentacles that would go into a number of other areas. We dealt with them quite a bit. Obviously, with the COVID pandemic, you were dealing with the FDA, HHS, with some of the monies that were coming in terms of stimulus. But outside of that, the other big surprising one, and this is not news to you, was the Department of Defense.
I was waiting for you to get to that one, because to me,
it's become woke in so many ways. And you identified this, whether it's firing of a chaplain, whether it's doing some kind of woke training, at a base in Alabama. It was just every single day. And these are the fighting men and women you served, all too well. And yet they are being indoctrinated by a leftist woke kind of philosophy that will cripple us in the end if it is not addressed. And President Trump was willing to take on, his own Secretary of Defense on that issue.
He was. And I just, I lament the fact that the president didn't have another 4 years, because there were really two agencies, in my view, from the outside that needed a lot of help. And that was the Department of Defense and the Department of Education. Inroads have been made in both, but they still, I think, of all of the agencies, still had a lot of, if you want to use the term deep state players still left in there. It was very difficult to see the president's agenda move forward in those agencies.
Well, you're exactly right. And while the Department of Education, obviously school choice and a number of things from a regulatory standpoint were at the top of the agenda, they would just so many of the bureaucrats have just burrowed in so deeply there that changing that would be almost impossible. And we see that now with this new administration and some of their just really far out extreme leftist ideas that they're implementing, not in Washington, D.C., but in a school district near you.
Right. Exactly. I want to bring up another topic that's in your book. You touch on it, and I think this is very instructive. And I think the president helped really pull back the curtain on this. And this is the leftist agenda of the media. Talk about, first, I want to, I'm sure you saw this, but this was a headline from December the 30th, just recently, from the AP. Slow motion insurrection, how GOP seizes election power. This is not an opinion piece. This was a news story about how states are changing election laws, reforming them based upon what was exposed in the 2020 election, calling that a slow motion insurrection, trying to tie it to the events, obviously, of January the 6th. What was your experience in dealing with the media? Are they fair players? Have they gotten the bad rap from conservatives?
No, they haven't gotten a bad rap. And I will say that it was a learning process for me, for Tony, because I was used to Capitol Hill, and whether there was a reporter that had more of a left leaning or a right leaning, I found most of the reporters on Capitol Hill were intent on doing journalistic. They may have a little bent one way or another. When I got to the White House, it was totally different. I mean, it was agenda driven, and obviously that is the highest priority for anybody in the journalism world, is to do the Washington, D.C. and the White House beat. But as you looked at that, they would take oftentimes anonymous sources, and I would give them an on-the-record quote, and they still would, that was opposite of that, and they would still run with the anonymous sources as being the end-all, be-all with credibility. And journalism broadly is really taking a nosedive. Some journalistic groups are now saying, well, they don't need two sources. They just need one source. So one person with a particular bent in vendetta can be quoted on, any of the major cable news networks as an authority. And yet that's not the journalism, even the left journalism standards that were adopted as recent as a decade ago.
Yeah, I with that understanding, should conservatives trust what they hear and see in the legacy media?
No, not at all. And listen, I was one that never used the word fake news until I actually got to the White House and experienced it. And sadly, what we're seeing now is really just they're competing with a lot of different people on the internet, bloggers and others, and the problem is we consume. We're trusting people. We see something and we go, well, gosh, if it's being reported, it's got to be true. I can just tell you there needs to be a strong discernment in terms of what you take in and what to trust. And you're right. Donald Trump was willing to call him out at great political risk. Yeah. And yet he identified a real problem that we have.
He did. He did expose it, and he really kind of solidified the sides by. And I think it was, I think it was necessary. It needed to be done. I mean, you and I both have been in meetings and in events where we go back and we see news coverage of it, and we wonder, is that the same place I was? I mean, it's completely different.
It never is. It's somebody at a water cooler giving a third-hand account of somebody who gave a second-hand account who wasn't at the meeting. And you know it. You've gotten to experience, up close and personal with personal attacks, against you. And what I would say is, those that have tuned in right now, listening, they need to go to a trusted source, and sadly, the legacy medias are losing that each and every day.
All right, where can folks get a copy of Chief's Chief? Where can they get the book?
They can go to their favorite bookstore. Well, some of their favorite bookstores. There's been the whole cancel culture with that as well. They can go online and order the Chief's Chief, and I think they'll find it a refreshing look about my time and even some time before that when I served with the 45th President of the United States. It's not one written from the left's perspective. I don't, if there's somebody tuned in and they're a leftist, I wouldn't recommend they buy the book.
On that picture, it looks like you're reading a note on the back of the president. Did somebody stick a, kick me or something?
I was listening intently, and I was where I should be, letting him be president and letting me support him in that role.
We're almost out of time, but I've got so many more questions. But let me just ask you this from a standpoint of, you were right there at the seat of the most powerful seat in the world. Given what you've seen in the last year, what's your greatest concern for America?
My greatest concern is what makes America great is truly not being held up. We've started to embrace socialist policies. We're starting to applaud not just the left. We're applauding leftist policies that are coming out of foreign countries. And bluntly, I don't know that a whole lot of decisions are being made in the Oval Office. It seems like it's more of an activist administration, and appeasing those on the left with some extreme ways of actually putting forth executive orders that do not support the family, our faith, or our freedoms.
Final question for you, Mark Meadows, working that closely with the president. I know you knew him beforehand and that's why he selected you as chief, but what was the most surprising thing you discovered about the president working for him?
Well, you wouldn't want me to say this, so I'll say it he's got a great sense of humor, and he's got an unbelievable compassionate heart. People don't realize that in the privacy, when there's no cameras rolling, things touch him in a way, and he does something about it, whether it's writing personal checks, whether it's making calls to people that have suffered loss. He loves this country and does that in a way that it profoundly impacted me and his work ethic. He worked around the clock. He about killed me. All this gray hair. I had a little bit before I went to the White House, but it's full on gray now.
Yeah, you told me that many times. You'd never worked harder. Mark Meadows, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Great to be with you, Tony. Take care. God bless. And thank the American people for their prayers for me in this difficult time. I feel them. And our Lord and Jesus Christ still reigns over the affairs of nations.
That's right. And, I'll continue to pray for you as well. Mark Meadows, pick up a copy of his book, Chief's Chief.